Let's talk about the myth of the golden hour. Not because it wasn't real, it absolutely was. It was used as the infrastructure for the modern US military's entire battlefield medical doctrine. And it worked. However, according to studies conducted throughout the global war on terrorism era, it was quickly found that 1 hour was too much, and more like 20 minutes or less, depending on the injuries, is the threshold for saving the lives of critically wounded troops. And as someone who was literally shot in the head in combat, I can tell you that every single one of those minutes counts. The commander of the Army's Medical Research and Development Command, Brigadier General Anthony McQueen, previously told Task and Purpose, quote, "You may have previously heard discussion of the golden hour. We're moving more toward a golden window of opportunity." But before we get into that, I have to give a shout out to Odoo for making this episode possible. Odoo is an all-encompassing business management software with a suite of integrated apps to streamline pretty much every aspect of your business operations. From sales and CRM to manufacturing and purchasing support, Odoo is your one-stop shop to handle literally everything in support of your business, large or small. With the sales app, you can create clean, professional, and interactive quotes and track them all the way through the process from sales leads to reporting and payment. And with the CRM platform, you'll have accurate, real-time data to inform sales decisions and forecast revenue. You can automatically plan the next activities based on your sales script throughout the sales pipeline with ease and never miss an important task needed to close out a deal. When it comes to manufacturing, Odoo's dashboard puts assembly data, work orders, load times, and so much more right at your fingertips. And with the mobile barcode app, you can scan and record production components to process orders and accelerate operations while reducing input errors. Right out of the box, blazing fast with zero latency. Whether you're a one-man band or a massive corporation, Odoo has innovative software solutions to future-proof your business. Visit odoo.com today to start with your first app completely free, no trial, no payment info, free for life. You'll be glad you did. During the GWOT era, the US military mastered immediately treating and then rapidly casevacing the wounded. Highly trained medical personnel were on the ground in most units and on patrol and on casevac helos, and teams of surgeons and doctors were stationed close to the front lines to patch up troops who likely would have died from those same injuries in past conflicts. But as the US military plans for a big war, they're having to accept that the golden hour is gone. As the Russia-Ukraine war and other battlefields have shown us, quickly getting severely wounded troops off the battlefield can lead to even more casualties or simply not having access by air, ground, or sea. For example, in a conventional fight, airlifting the wounded from the battlefield probably won't be an option due to enemy aircraft or anti-air defenses. Instead, doctors, researchers, war planners, and troops have to figure out a way to not just keep the wounded alive, all while being stuck in a forward position, but in some cases treat them, right there, in the midst of it all, as rounds crack overhead and indirect fire rains down. So get ready for a crash course, pun absolutely intended, on what trauma care for frontline troops might look like in a large-scale war. During the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, as well as other conflicts, the US military pulled off near immediate trauma care in hostile areas at scale for the first time in its history. If you got hit and your medic was nearby, the odds were in your favor. Throughout the past 20 years at war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and many other countries, the US had the air superiority necessary to make the golden hour a reality. Battlefields were blanketed with medevac helicopters, combat support hospitals, and forward surgical teams. They even started putting trauma surgeons forward with infantry battalions. The playbook was airtight. Hit the stopwatch the second someone goes down to make damn sure they're in an operating room within 60 minutes. Or at least that's what the original thought process was early on in the GWOT. A case study published in the Journal of Special Operations Medicine's Spring 2019 edition explains that recent evidence showed that 95% of early deaths resulting from traumatic injuries may have been prevented if the patient can undergo damage control surgery within 23 minutes of injury. Now, don't get it twisted. Damage control surgery is what's done to ensure that a wounded service member can make it to what's called definitive care. They had to survive the major injuries and become stabilized in order to undergo more complex procedures to keep them alive. The case study was focused on a partner force soldier during a mission where the ground team came under heavy fire, creating 3 wounded with 1 who was shot in the back and in critical condition. The flight surgeon hopped on an HH-60 Black Hawk helicopter after the 9 line got radioed, an unusual circumstance, and he was flown to the wounded soldier under heavy enemy fire. Once on the ground, 2 walking wounded and the critical patient were brought to the bird. Keep in mind, surgical resuscitation teams are usually at least 4 surgeons, but on that day, it was just a surgeon and a flight medic, because God loves medics. Once loaded, the surgeon found that the critical soldier had 2 gunshots to his back. He immediately got to work stabilizing the patient despite the 21-minute flight to the OR. The soldier was well on his way to death, so the surgeon completed bilateral chest decompression to relieve the lungs. Think 2 big-ass needles right through your ribs, and not in a sexy way. What? The left side had blood coming out the catheter that was placed. This surgeon had guts. He immediately moved to intubation, placing a breathing tube in the trachea, which didn't work, so he performed cricothyroid. You try to say it. That's how it's spelled. So he performed a cricothyrotomy. That opened the throat, and then the surgeon placed a breathing tube directly into the trachea below the oropharynx. Once done, the flight medic was running the bag valve mask to artificially breathe for the dying soldier. The surgeon instructed one of the partner force walking wounded on how to do CPR, as he prepped his gear for resuscitative thoracotomy, cutting the chest wide open. He did so by laying down on the side, opening the soldier's chest and relieving the pooled blood. In one hand, the surgeon held the lung while simultaneously massaging the heart until they landed back at base, where the Golden Hour Offset Surgical Treatment Team, GHOST-T, took over. Because we really love our abbreviations, don't we? That soldier was stabilized within 30 minutes, flown to a more advanced facility where he underwent even more surgery. The soldier was awake and talking less than 24 hours after getting shot twice in the back, leading to damage to his lungs and diaphragm, a potentially unsurvivable injury. He has since made a full recovery with both lungs working normally. And because of that, he only received a 30% service-connected rating. Probably. Maybe. But you know I'm not wrong. This kind of emergency surgery, which was pulled off in flight, is typically done in an OR with multiple teams of trauma surgeons, respiratory docs, anesthesiologists, and many more who work together. This surgeon did it with just him and his flight medic. Talk about the GOAT of military surgeons. From traumatic cardiac arrest to kind of alive to bona fide alive, that, my friends, is the pinnacle of what frontline medical care looks like. But the dirty little secret is it only worked because the US owned the sky. As Military Review put it, quote, "Future large-scale combat operations will be fought in environments where air superiority is contested, where long-range fires, cyber attacks, and electronic warfare degrade medical evacuation and logistics." One way to look at it is that for the US military, we've had a blend of luck via ill-equipped enemy and flip-flops toting AKs. I feel attacked by that sentence. And skill, though it's not everything. In other words, the military is having to rapidly adapt and improvise in case they find themselves in a fight with a near-peer enemy and can't rely on the kind of rapid evacs they've had access to in the past. The military had somewhat of a safety net for decades, and that won't exist outside the counterinsurgency fight. Hell, look at Operation Gothic Serpent on October 3rd, 1991, when highly trained special operations forces found themselves pinned down in Mogadishu for almost 2 days. And yes, that was the Black Hawk Down incident. But Ukraine is proving what medicine looks like when the golden hour isn't an option, and it's forcing the Pentagon to take notice. Imagine trying the GWOT playbook against an enemy who can knock your aircraft out of the sky before it hits the LZ. Or if a ballistic missile hits the forward surgical team that a platoon relies on for immediate care, close to the front lines. Russia's war in the Ukraine shows us what happens when the air is denied. The roads are mined, and ground transportation can be halted by mud season, and the front line moves by the hour. And what we're learning is grim. In Ukraine, helicopter medevacs can be suicide missions with anti-aircraft guns, rockets, and drones. Casualty evacuation is often done by civilian vehicles under fire with minimal medical oversight. The stark reality today, in that kind of fight, is that the golden hour has become outdated, and the military is in need of prolonged casualty care on the battlefield. So what the hell do you do with a bleeding soldier when you can't evac them in an hour post-injury, let alone several days? Ukraine has become a test bed for next-gen battlefield medicine, and US advisors are watching everything. The Ukrainians are doing prolonged care under fire on a level never seen before. They're improvising field hospitals in basements and bunkers. They're pushing the limits of human endurance, and US medical doctrine is playing catch-up. The US military has had to adapt its training and tactics plenty of times throughout its history. as do most nations' militaries. And it's time for them to do it again. A lot of research, testing, and training is already happening to meet the new demands of the battlefield. This is where things get wild. For the US military, this isn't the hurry up and wait debacle many of us experienced while serving over the past 2 decades. The Pentagon is finally waking up to the fact that the future of battlefield care won't be fast. It'll have to be resilient. We're talking freeze-dried plasma, artificial blood, smart AI-assisted anesthesia, and field-ready pain management. And the biggest killer we're still not talking about, full-scale antibiotic-resistant infections. Let's break those down. Freeze-dried plasma, FDP. It's not new, it's an old-school answer to heavy blood loss that the US ditched after World War II. But Europe kept using it, and it's back in the fight for good reason. Whole blood is king when it comes to extreme blood loss, but it spoils quickly and supply issues are a reality. That's where FDP comes in, beating out traditional but outdated treatment by infusing normal saline, which doesn't provide anything but fluid volume and is absent of coagulation factors and oxygen carrying capacity. Dr. Steve Schauer, an Army emergency medicine physician for the past 9 years, previously told Task and Purpose, quote, "While FDP doesn't fix the oxygen delivery problem, it does fix some of the coagulopathy problems. Because you're now restoring all the blood coagulation factors that have been just burned through trying to form a clot. Obviously, as they bleed out and lose volume, they also lose some coagulation factors. So rather than diluting all that stuff down with normal saline, now you're replacing the factors they've lost with human-derived coagulation factors. It's something Ukraine has been putting to full use, claiming they've helped save lives using FDP when blood transfusions were unavailable. It's something that can help soldiers get to surgery when their evac is delayed, but it's been an uphill battle to get it approved for military-wide use. The hesitation traces back to the original reason FDP was pulled after World War II. Considering that blood screenings for hepatitis was figured out in 1971, it's pretty crazy to think this wasn't figured out earlier. Even crazier, there's a new game in town that introduces science fiction to the modern warfighter. Artificial blood, like in True Blood, but without all the sexy vampires. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is throwing big money at synthetic, shelf-stable, universal blood. No typing, no cross-match, no freezing. This is a literal game changer, critical to prolonged care for the wounded with no hope of medevac. Dr. Alan Doctor, first of all, great name. Secondly, he had no hope of doing anything else with his life. That's like when Mark Webb directed the 2 amazing Spider-Man movies. Like, come on, that's all he was gonna do. Doctor, and Doctor is a professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and is the principal investigator for the study. In a 2023 press release on the project, doctors said they've assembled an outstanding team to develop a biosynthetic whole blood product that can be freeze-dried for easy portability, storage, and reconstitution. The artificial blood will be designed for easy use in the field by medics at the point of injury. It will perform like a traditional blood transfusion, stabilizing the patient's blood pressure or facilitating blood clotting, for example. This isn't the stuff of sci-fi. Ukraine has proven how often you can't get blood to the wounded fast enough. That's the critical gap DARPA wants to fill. Once available, artificial blood will be a game changer. But there are other key components that the military needs to step up their game on. Pain control, for example. You'd think it's a no-brainer to have some sort of pain control, knowing troops can be shot, blown up, or injured in a variety of ways. Right now, our frontline pain control protocol is antiquated. In fact, an op-ed published by Task and Purpose and written by a cohort of heavily experienced military physicians pointed to morphine as, quote, the dinosaur looking for a tar pit, saying the military is relying on an acute pain control measure that's been in use since the Civil War. Other preferred options include the fentanyl lollipop that the 75th Ranger Regiment has put into use for years, or ketamine, a dissociative pain control unlike traditional opiate pain medicines. Due to limited access because of the off-label use not approved by the Federal Drug Administration, access to these meds is limited, if not impossible, for the general military. Researchers are looking into alternative, rapid dissolving fentanyl tablets and AI-assisted nerve block injectables, but none of it is field ready yet. Until they are, pain remains a battlefield liability that just isn't being addressed fast enough. But there's another pesky enemy in play that needs more attention, and you won't see it coming, and it doesn't wait for an evac. In Ukraine, they're seeing catastrophic resistance to antibiotics. Dr. Roman Fischuk. These names are amazing this week, by the way. He's an ear, nose, and throat doctor who will be collecting data from frontline hospitals in Ukraine to support a Pentagon-funded study on antibiotic-resistant infections. Told Task and Purpose, You have a bacterial infection. You need to track the bacterial infection with antibiotic, or if you have a viral infection, you treat the patient with antivirals. But if the patient is resistant to antibiotics, you cannot treat the cause of the disease. You can't help the patient in many ways. You're very limited with the options you have for that patient. Ukraine's morbidity rate is on the rise due to general antibiotics being used to treat bacterial infections, and supply is a problem to top it off. Our reliance on broad-spectrum antibiotics is a time bomb. We need new drugs, better wound care protocols, and mobile labs to test for resistance in real time. An amplifying factor is what we've been talking about this whole time. EVAC is limited. The DoD's Combat Casualty Research Program, led by University of Colorado and Schultz Medical Campus researchers, is leading to a project by working with Ukrainian clinicians to figure out how modern large-scale combat operations adversely affect the clinical and logistical challenges with prolonged casualty care. The principal investigator on the project, Dr. Adit Gins, says the issues are profound, with wide-reaching impacts on troops and civilians subjected to war-torn areas. There's limited access to evacuation, limited access to care, so these wounds kind of stay dirty and unclean and have a high chance of infection. This is one of the huge challenges of caring for those injured in the war. And then layering on top of that, there's a large prevalence of antibiotic or antimicrobial resistant bacteria. Go figure, lack of access to sterile hospital settings prevents wounds from staying clean. Who would have thunk it? Buckle up, the next big war feels more likely every day, and the signs are strong enough to have the military doubling down on preparing for it. Though the golden hour gave us confidence, it also gave us complacency. If you think the next war is going to let us run birds into a hot LZ, stabilize casualties on the fly, and have them eating chow that night, you're lying to yourself. In a future fight, your corpsman, your medic, your platoon sergeant will likely end up being your ICU for hours, days, weeks, or maybe even months. So hopefully, you all get along real well. That's going to take a lot of new training, gear, and a highly adaptable mindset. A task and purpose op-ed written by another group of U.S. military physicians and other medical professionals emphasized that the tactical combat casualty care level of training needs to be enhanced, the whole trauma care capabilities leveraged to full scale, and a new focus on what prolonged casualty care will look like. The physicians who wrote the op-ed said, prolonged casualty care should be recalibrated and defined as basic aid station care and provide guidelines and protocols that will allow the medical provider in an austere setting the recommendations to provide the best survival for those severely wounded casualties that need immediate advanced care before being evacuated to a military treatment facility with surgical capability. The current TCCC guidelines provide care beyond the capability of many enlisted medics. Still, the physicians insist it should remain a standard of care for troops at the point of injury. As the Army's Medical Review article bluntly laid out, medical planning and support must begin from the premise that evacuation may not be possible. You don't get a second chance in combat medicine. If we don't adapt now, we'll be writing obituaries that we didn't have to. The golden hour isn't a failure. It was a damn miracle in a lot of ways. As Task and Purpose previously reported, over the last 2 decades, the U.S. military's approach to treating the wounded resulted in the highest survival rate in its history. But miracles don't win wars. Preparation does. As always, thanks for watching. I'm the guy who wouldn't be here if it weren't for the medics of the 86th Combat Support Hospital. Thom Tran, signing off.